Tonight, someone will light a candle and not think about it for even a second. A stove will click on, a phone screen will glow in a dark room. Fire in its tamest, most domesticated form surrounds him constantly, and he has stopped noticing it entirely. But the real answer to why he lights that candle, why his brain relaxes the moment a flame appears, why an entire species built its further than agriculture, further than almost anything else that makes him human. Some scientists now believe fire did not just help humanity, it built humanity not metaphorically, physically, structurally, down in the wiring of the brain itself. Here is the moment worth sitting with. Somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago, a hominin ancestor crouched near a smoldering log left behind by a lightning strike. He did not run. He did not ignore it either. He watched it, and at some point, watching turned into keeping. That single shift from fearing fire to tending it may be the most consequential decision in the history of life on Earth. Not because of warmth, not because of light, because of what happened next inside the skull. For decades, the dominant theory of human origins focused on tools and hunting. Bigger's brain, the story came first and clever hands followed. But that story has a hole in it. Brains are expensive. A modern human brain burns roughly 20% of the body daily energy, while making up only 2% of its weight. An early hominin surviving on raw plants, an occasional scavenged meat simply did not have the caloric surplus to build and run an organ that costly. Something had to change first on the input side before the brain could afford to grow at all. This is where Richard Wrangham, a primatologist at Harvard, offered an answer that reformed the entire conversation. He proposed what is now called the cooking hypothesis. His argument was simple and at the time controversial. Cooking does not just make food taste better, it makes food radically cheaper to digest. Heat breaks down tough plant fiber and denatures proteins before they ever reach the stomach, which means the body spends far less energy extracting the same number of calories. Wrangham calculated that cooked food could deliver so much more usable energy that early humans may have gained hours back in their day, hours they used to have spent chewing and digesting raw food for nearly half of it. Chimpanzees, by comparison, still spend nearly 6 hours a day just chewing. Humans spend under an hour. That gap did not appear by accident. Something rewired the entire energy budget of the species. Wrangham's claim was that cooking, made possible only by controlled fire, freed up to caloric surplus that allowed the brain to grow to its current size, smaller guts, smaller jaws, smaller teeth, and a brain that kept getting bigger generation after generation, fed by a food source no other animal on the planet had learned to create. There is a companion idea here, developed separately by anthropologists Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler, called the expensive tissue hypothesis. Their observation was almost an accounting problem. Metabolically active organs, brain tissue and digestive tissue especially, are both extremely costly to maintain, and a body generally cannot afford to enlarge one without shrinking the other. Compare a human gut to the gut of the chimpanzee of similar body size, and the human version dramatically smaller, lighter, less muscular. Something allowed the digestive tract to shrink, and that same freed up energy budget appears to have been redirected upward into the skull. Cooked food, already partly broken down by heat before it ever reaches the stomach, is the most obvious candidate for what allowed the gut to shrink in the first place. Two separate lines of research, one built on caloric math, one built on comparative anatomy, arrived at the same narrow window in time and the same single cause. None of this would matter if fire use were rare or occasional. It had to be constant, reliable, embedded into daily survival for evolution to select for a body built around its assumptions. And this is precisely why the evidence at Gesher Benot Ya'aqov carries so much weight. A single ancient campfire proves nothing except that fire happened once. Layer after layer of hearths in the same location over centuries prove habit. They prove a group of hominins who expected fire to be there, who planned around it, who organized their days and nights, assuming it would keep burning. But a hypothesis needs evidence in the ground, not just the math in a lab. And here the story moves to northern Israel, to a site called Gesher Benot Ya'aqov. On the banks of what is now the Jordan River. There, archaeologist Namagoren Inbar led excavations that uncovered something remarkable. Clustered patches of burnt flint and charred concentrated in specific spots rather than scattered randomly across the landscape. Scattered burn marks might mean wildfire. Scattered repeated burn patches in the same location, layer after layer, mean something else entirely. The main intention? Her team dated the site to roughly 790,000 years ago, pushing control fire use back further than almost anyone expected, and placing it firmly in the hands of Homo erectus, not modern humans at all. This matters enormously. Homo erectus had a brain roughly 2/3 the size of a modern human's, larger than any hominin before it, and living at a time that lines up almost exactly with when Wrangham cooking hypothesis predicts the energy surplus should have appeared. The math and the mud, in other words, start pointing at the same day. Why does any of this matter to someone standing in a kitchen tonight, waiting for water to boil? Because the changes triggered by fire did not stop at brain size. They rewired behavior in ways still visible in every human alive today. Consider the campfire itself. Before fire, hominin groups had no reason to gather after dark. Night meant danger, meant hiding, meant silence. Once fire could be kept burning, night because something new, a lit circle where predators stayed back, where hands were free, where nothing needed chewing or hunting or fleeing. For the first time, there was unstructured time. An unstructured time around a shared light source appears in the anthropological record of surviving hunter-gatherer societies, to be dominated overwhelmingly by one activity. Anthropologist Polly Wisner spent years studying the Juwansi people of the Kalahari, comparing what they talked about during the day versus what they talked about at night around the fire. Daytime conversation, she found, revolved around practical matters, complaints, logistics, economic disputes. Nighttime firelight conversation shifted dramatically toward myth, history, humor, and social bonding. The exact kind of talk that builds shared culture and cements group identity. The fire did not just cook the food. It appears to have carved out the very first stage for human storytelling. The ancestor of every campfire tale, every religious parable, every bedtime story told to a child a million years later. There is a reason a fireplace still feels like the emotion center of a home, even in a house with central heating that makes the fire functionally unnecessary. There is a reason candlelight makes conversation feel more intimate than fluorescent light does. The nervous system was shaped over hundreds of thousands of years to associate flickering warm light with safety, with rest, with the specific kind of vulnerability that allows real connection. He is not imagining that feeling, he inherited it. Fire appears to have reshaped something even more basic than social behavior, the sleep cycle itself. Sleep, researcher Jerome Siegel studied 3 modern hunter-gatherer groups living without electricity in Tanzania, Namibia, and Bolivia, expecting to find people who fell asleep at dusk. That moment, darkness removed all activity. Instead, he found something closer to the opposite. These groups typically stayed awake for several hours after sunset, active, talking, engaged, clustered near a fire before finally sleeping in a single, consolidated block through the night. Firelight, in other words, appears to have manufactured an entirely new segment of the day. Several hours of low light, social time that would not otherwise have existed, wedged between the end of useful daylight and the start of sleep. It is not a coincidence that this same window, a few hours of relaxed activity before bed, still structure modern evenings almost perfectly. Long after the fire that invented it has been replaced by a lamp or a screen. Fire also changed the calculus of danger after dark. Predator encounters overwhelmingly favor whichever party can see and whichever party cannot. A hominin group with even a modest fire held a defensive advantage no unprotected group could match, since large nocturnal predators generally avoid open flame. Some researchers argue this single shift, safety after dark, may have mattered as much for early population growth as any dietary change. Fewer nighttime deaths, compounding generation after generation is, in evolutionary terms, every bit as powerful as more calories. Cooking changed something else too, something structural in how communities organized themselves. Raw food can be eaten alone on the move whenever it is found. Cooked food requires a fire, and a fire requires tending, and tending requires staying in one place for a while. Meals, in the modern sense, a group gathering at a fixed time around a shared heat source to eat together, may not have existed at all before. Cooking made them necessary. The dinner table, in other words, might be fire's most enduring invention, older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than almost every other institution that structures daily human life. Even the shape of the human face changed. Compare a skull from 3 million years ago to a modern human skull, and one of the most obvious differences is the jaw. Older hominins had massive jaw muscles anchored to heavy ridges of bone, built for grinding tough raw plant matter for hours. As cooking softened food and shortened chewing time, the pressure to maintain that heavy jaw machinery disappeared. Over generations, faces became smaller, flatter, more delicate, freeing up space in the skull that some researchers believe may have made room for exactly the kind of brain expansion the cooking hypothesis predicts. Softer food, in a very real sense, may have helped carve the modern human face out of heavier ancestral one. None of this means fire was gentle in how it shaped in species. Fire is also a weapon, a tool for clearing land, a source of catastrophic risk if a earth spreads uncontrolled through dry grass. Historian Stephen Pine, who has spent much of his career studying fire's role across human history, has argued that humans are, in evolutionary terms, essentially a fire-adapted species in the same way some plants are fire-adapted, dependent on it, shaped by it, unable to fully separate their biology from their relationship to flame. Grasslands across entire continents were reshaped by early controlled burning long before farming existed. Landscapes across Africa, Australia, and the America bear the fingerprints of hominins who used fire not just to cook but to hunt, to clear undergrowth, to signal across distances. The species did not simply discover fire. It negotiated an entire ecological partnership with it, one that reorganized forests, grasslands, and eventually its own body. Consider what fire made possible in hunting alone. A grassland burned deliberately regrows within weeks with fresh, tender shoots that draw grazing animals back to a predictable location at a predictable time in numbers a hunting party can plan around. Fire could also be used to funnel herds toward a cliff edge or a narrow gorge, turning an unpredictable chase into something closer to a managed harvest. None of this required understanding combustion chemistry. It only required watching, generation after generation, what fire reliably did to a landscape and learning to trigger that outcome on command. The kind of environmental engineering, reshaping the world rather than simply reacting to it, is a strange kind of intelligence to find in a species that had not yet invented the wheel, the written word, or single permanent building. There is something worth sitting with in how fragile that first ember must have been. No matches, no lighters. Once a fire went out, restarting one from scratch using friction or sparked stone could take enormous effort and might fail entirely in wet conditions. This is likely why early hominin groups treated fire keeping as a serious responsibility, why certain individuals may have been assigned specifically to keep a hearth alive through the night, why losing a fire may have been treated as a genuine emergency rather than a minor inconvenience. Some anthropologists studying surviving fire-dependent foraging groups have noted a related habit, carrying a slow-burning ember, wrapped and protected whenever a group moved camp, precisely so that a fire never truly had to be built again from nothing. The ember was, in effect, treated as a kind of inheritance, passed forward rather than recreated, because recreating it was neither granted nor cheap. That instinct has not vanished, it has just been redirected. The anxiety feeling of a phone battery dying, of losing power during a storm, of a pilot light going out on a stove taps into something ancient. The memory of a species that once measured survival in whether the fire was still burning by morning. And here is the part that reframes everything. He assumes he lights a candle for atmosphere, for warmth, for the smell of it. He assumes the dinner table is simply a piece of furniture and that gathering people around it after dark is just tradition, something a parent or a culture taught him to value. But the pull he feels toward flickering light, toward gathering people around warmth, toward the particular comfort of shared food eaten at a fixed time in one place, is not a modern invention layered on top of a blank evolutionary flat. It is closer to the opposite. Fire did not just change what humans ate or where they slept. Over hundreds of thousands of years and multiple hominin species, it may have shaped the size of the brain, doing the noticing, the shape of the face, doing the eating, and the emotional weeding that make a small orange flame feel, even now, like something closer to home than almost anything else. Tonight, someone will light a candle and not think about it for even a second. But for nearly 2 million years before he was born, an entire species negotiated its survival, its diet, its evenings, and quite possibly its own brain around that exact same flickering light.